a Nobody's Project production.
Grandpa, please tell us a story about where to find the big hairy beasts. The old man sat quietly and started to form a little wry smile. Shh, quieten down, kids, he murmured. Grandpa, tell us the story about when you escaped from the running water with those monsters with the big teeth, another child squealed. The old man chuckled. Each time the moon was blackest, he would be asked to tell the tribe another story around their central fire. All the children would stay up a little later and hopefully learn a thing or two. Shh. He was almost ready to start. A hush went through the gathered people as even the adults were looking forward to this moment each moon cycle. Grandpa was the oldest person still with the tribe. His offspring had all gone and he now continued to live because the tribe's people loved him. They valued his past and his wisdom. Although his eyesight was long gone and his hands were weak, each moon cycle, on the blackest night, he would be given the main seat around the central fire, and all who were there would be silent and listen. They would listen very closely. I'm sorry, little ones, he started. Tonight I'm not going to tell you a story about where to find the big hairy beasts. Nor will I tell you a story of the time I fought the water monster with the big sharp teeth. Tonight I'm going to tell you a story about heroes and villains, about what can happen when bad people rise to power. I'm going to tell you about a time long, long ago, in a place far, far away. The flock of children around the fire felt a silent shiver blow through the crowd. The adults all turned towards Grandpa and finished what they were doing. He now had their attention. A long time, just as he was beginning his tale, Grandpa was disrupted by one of the youngest children sitting close to him, pulling on his cloak. "Are you the hero?" she inquired. "I'm not the hero this time," he replied. "But I did know her." The tribe gasped with excitement. They loved the stories about when women were as strong as men and as wise. "But please," he interrupted, bringing the gathering to silence once more. "Let me begin. A long, long time ago, in a place far, far away, there lived a little girl and a little boy." He had their attention at last. Too Many Arseholes is a social project looking at the rise of pathological behaviours in our society and the erosion of social trust, creating a better conversation around why this is, and finding a way forward to a greater humanity. Today we're going to tell you a story about telling stories. This podcast is also part of a larger social project that we want you, the listener, to join in on. Key to this project is bringing together threads from many academic disciplines to create a body of knowledge we can develop with you to help us all with having better conversations around these pathological behaviours in our personal and social circles. Thanks for joining us today for Season 1, Episode 18. Storytelling is universal across all cultures, and as we will see, there are many repetitive sub-themes we see constantly across all forms of storytelling. And as you can probably guess, they've got something to do with humanity. And so thanks for joining us and coming along on this journey of reflection and discovery as we attempt to unpack and better understand why there's just too many arseholes. Can you tell a story? You could start it with, "It was a bright cold day in April and the clocks were striking 13. Or you could start it with, "The world is changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air." much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it. Either of those are pretty amazing ways to start some of our most loved stories of the last 100 years. But a story is more than just an opening. Can you put together a narrative with characters and a moral arc? Can you give it a start, a middle, and an ending? And can you make this compelling, inviting, and also include a moral, ethical, or human lesson? Something for the audience to take with them. A lesson from our past that we may need in our future. The art of storytelling is older than any of our records. From the time our earliest humans formed complex speech, and possibly even before then, early humans could and would communicate a variety of information, detailed knowledge of how to live and survive many things, and various nuggets of wisdom through the medium of storytelling. Our songs told stories. Our dances told stories. Our past, best described as our time of dreaming, was remembered mostly through the art of stories. And stories are a great way to share information. They are drawn from and reflect the world around us. They include people we may be familiar with or people so foreign to us that the mere fact that they are also human is beyond imagination. And we continue using stories to this very day to communicate the simplest and the most complex of insights and observations. Many times when you chat with family or friends, you don't just blurt out the information, you give it a little context first. You identify the people involved and introduce them if they are not known to whom you are having the chat with. It could sound something like this. So, you remember Mike from my Christmas party last year? Nah, the one wearing the reindeer t-shirt. Yeah, the red one. Well, outside of work, he's really into salsa dancing. I know, you wouldn't pick it. Well, he is. You then provide a little context leading up to the point. So anyway, Mike was away for the last few weeks. He told everyone he was off to Spain for some dance thing, lessons, who knows. And now that you've introduced the characters and provided background context, you can deliver a more memorable conclusion, usually with a little narrative impact for effect. Yeah, so long story too long already. Yeah, too late. I know. Anyway, he bloody rocks up to work on Monday with a broken foot and the gold medal from the World Salsa Dancing Championships. Yeah, can you believe it? I work with the world champion of salsa dancing. His fish sandwiches still sink the kitchenette out. Nah, I don't know how he broke his foot. I can't wait to hear that story. Telling stories is so ingrained in how we communicate that we do it all day, every day, and in some way without even realising it. Just look at all the art, film and theatre. They all tell a story or have a story behind them. Our earliest known writing, the story of Gilgamesh and Enkidu, known as the Epic of Gilgamesh, is a complex narrative of heroes and villains. It has a start, a middle and an end. And there is also a story about the discovery of this story. There's a link in our show notes, but here's the long story told short. George Smith, an English Assyriologist circa 1860s, would often visit the British Museum to study these old, strange tablets. He eventually got some traction on deciphering the Epic of Gilgamesh, and on reading the section on the Great Flood, he started running around, stripping off his clothes. So excited was he that he had discovered a second story about a great flood. A start, a character, a middle with build-up and context, and a conclusion and resolution. Stories are not just aimless sequences of information. That's more like instructions or manuals. Stories have something else that make them so special. They create a connection between you, the audience, and the story itself. You may see yourself in that narrative. It may remind you of someone and a place you have been before or from your past. Stories are, in essence, our greatest form of communicating our humanity, by showing everyone what it means to be a human and also what bad human behaviour looks like so we can spot it when they are present. Stories are a reflection of our humaneness, our humanity, and all the challenges we have trying to protect it, redefine it if necessary, and how to spread the message of a greater humanity, or at least a place better than the world we currently live in. To quote a poet, novelist, literary critic, essayist, and environmental activist, Margaret Atwood, "You're never going to kill storytelling because it's built into the human plan. We come with it." Most of our earliest stories emerged from our earliest religions and from our understanding of our gods. As well as the Gilgamesh epic, we have the stories that make up the Old Testament, Homer's classics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and many other stories that originated out of the lands of Mesopotamia, India, China, and the other earliest of cultures. We somehow continue to remember a few of them to this very day, and we have done this over thousands of years. But we are going to tell you a story that is so old it predates all of these stories. It comes from a culture at least 65,000 years old. And to put this into perspective, Assyriologists believe the Epic of Gilgamesh was written between approximately 2150 and 1200 BCE in ancient Mesopotamia. That's between 3,200 and 4,200 years ago. So this story is beyond ancient. It truly is way back before ancient times, in a time of dreaming. This story explains how the lands were formed, the mountains, the valleys, and the rivers. This story also explains the bringing of life-giving water, and it provides rules for the people to learn, so they can work in harmony with their land, learn the lessons of folly and the consequences poor choices can have. This story is about a snake. More correctly, it's about a serpent, a rainbow serpent. Let's begin. At the beginning of the dream time, the earth was flat and dry and empty. There were no trees, no rivers, no animals and no grass. It was a dry and flat land. One day, Guriella, the rainbow serpent, woke from his sleep and set off to find his tribe. He crossed Australia from east to west and north to south, stopping to listen for his people. He crossed every part of the dry, flat land, but found nothing. After searching for a long time, he grew tired and lay down to sleep. The land he lay down to sleep on was not the same land he'd set out to search for his people on. As he looked for his people, his big, long body had cut great gouges into the land. Guriella laid in the sand all alone until he decided to create more life in the world. He called, "Frogs, come out." The frogs rose out of the ground with their bellies full of water that they had stored. He tickled the frogs until the water burst from their mouths and filled the gorges in the land. These gorges made the rivers and streams we see today. As the water flowed over the land, grass and trees began to grow and fill the land with colour. Now that there was grass to eat and water to drink, Guriella woke the animals. The kookaburras laughed, the goanna walked, and the wombat climbed out of her burrow, all for the first time. Some animals lived in the sea, swimming back and forward. Some animals lived in the sky, flying with their friends to distant places. Some animals lived on the ground, digging and playing in the sand. They were happy and gathered food and water to bring back to their own tribes. The rainbow serpent made rules that all animals had to obey. He said, "All animals that obey the rules will be rewarded by becoming humans. The animals that disobey the rules will be punished." Some animals followed the rules and were rewarded with being turned into humans. Other animals that disobeyed the rules and were turned into the stone that makes the mountains. One day, it all started to rain. And it rained like it never had rained before. Rain fell for days and days and the world became flooded with water. Two young men, Bilbil, or the Rainbow Lorikeet brothers, had no shelter, and they came to the rainbow serpent. They asked him for help sheltering from the rain. The rainbow serpent was hungry and tricked the young men. "I have no shelter, but you can hide in my mouth. You'll be safe from the rain in there." The young men climbed into Guriella's mouth and he closed it shut, swallowing both men. He soon realised that people would notice the young men missing and come looking for them. He knew they would find their tracks leading right up to his mouth. He didn't want to get caught and so decided to hide in the only place he knew he would be safe, the sky. He hid in the sky away from the people chasing him and he saw their sadness at losing these two young men. He decided to try and make them happy again, so turned his body into a big arc with beautiful colours. Now, every time, just after it rains, you can see the rainbow serpent sharing his beautiful colours with the people on the ground as his way of saying sorry for taking those Rainbow Lorikeet brothers. The Rainbow Serpent Dreamtime story is a foundational Indigenous Australian creation myth describing a powerful ancestral being who shaped the initially flat landscape. Representing water, fertility and renewal, the serpent is a guardian of waterholes. It is often associated with the rainbow, linking the earth to the sky. The Rainbow Serpent established laws for living in harmony with nature. It rewarded those who obeyed with human form and punished lawbreakers by turning them into stone. As a major creator deity, this story teaches respect for the country and the vital importance of water sources. This story, which is a key aspect of Aboriginal spirituality, emphasises the interconnectedness of nature and the spirit world. As an Australian growing up in the 70s, 80s and 90s, this story was one of the first Aboriginal stories we were all taught at school. This simple and beautiful story encapsulates the magic of this land and the wisdom of its First Nations people. But you don't have to be a First Nations person to appreciate and take something from this story. It's for all that call Australia home. When you do get a chance to get out of the cities, you can, especially after a sun shower, imagine a great rainbow serpent carving out the land into its many mountain ranges and long rivers as it arcs itself up high into the sky. And so, from our earliest stories, we return back to more modern times. More complex stories and more ways these stories can be told. No longer is a story a narrative, a fireside ritual, or the prophesizing of a wandering bard. Stories were eventually written down, painted on walls and canvases. Stories were sung, drawn, acted out, narrated, filmed, and now stories can be almost fully immersive in a digital space. The many and varied means a story can now teach us the lessons embedded within its script is unfathomable for people from our past. However, no matter what story you read, watch, listen, or partake in, they all seem to have deep sub-themes critical to us all collectively accepting them as stories that should be told. There are stories for every moment, every emotion, all the victories and all the suffering. There are stories about all kinds of love, the deserved and the stolen triumphs, despair, survival, and the deepest of losses. If we've done it as humans, and even if we can only imagine it, there will be a story somewhere that brings this time and place to life, where we humans can engage, feel within and a part of for a moment, escape from this world for a world somewhat different. And ultimately, we can be shown a small reflection of ourselves, our best and our worst sides. We can assess ourselves on our own humanity through the many and varied stories we consume. And this brings us to an important sub-theme: humans. Stories we tell have humans at the centre of them all, even when they are only two robots left on a distant planet. It's their anthropomorphic characteristics, their human elements that we all connect with. If you were thinking of R2-D2 and C-3PO, nice, but we're actually thinking of Wally and Eve, but both work in this context. All the remembered stories and retold stories are essentially stories reflecting our world and our humanity. The satisfying ending is one where their final outcome is a humane one, or the tragedy is one that draws on the weaknesses and folly of man, where more humane paths would have taken the narrative to a more satisfying ending, but not this time. And it's these deepest sub-themes, the ones that underpin our sense of our own humanity, that keep coming up through all our story forms. The protagonist is mostly a person presiding on the side of humane decisions and actions. The antagonist is not so much a positive humane person, but someone more aligned to our more basic instincts, more animalistic urges, our more pathological natures. Whether they stand on the light side or the dark side of the Force, whether they wear a black hat or a white hat, a traditional story goes to great lengths to give you characters that you can identify with. The most memorable stories take you on a journey as their characters battle against great odds, resist the temptations of taking the easier, more self-serving paths. The character's arc and the story's final conclusion gives you more than you started with, a little bit of wisdom, or a new way to handle your own life's challenges. These stories help us better define what it means to be humane and to be inhumane, of what we collectively accept as societies and what we don't. As a 21st century audience, we have had to come to terms with many of our stories from our past that just don't age well now. The stories of our colonial past don't tell the story of conquest anymore. They tell of devastation, destruction, of lost cultures we now will never get a chance to appreciate. These stories of conquest mean little now that we know smallpox and other horrible diseases preceded most stories of colonial expansion. And as we have said previously, if only we had germ theory before we sailed to the West. But they are stories from our past. It will be up to our future selves to decide if these stories that currently don't seem to have aged well survive the test of time. But for stories to survive the test of time, it will be more than just a survival of the fittest scenario. Stories are not fixed things. It's their fluid nature, how they get told and retold over and over again, that makes the greatest of stories continue on throughout history. If you have had the pleasure of watching Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, and you are familiar with the original Shakespeare play, then you can appreciate on some deeper level how the themes of this particular play can be reinvented and retold for contemporary audiences time and time again. The story still stands true. The moral compromises found in love and conflict, of duty and despair, ring now as loudly as they did back in Shakespeare's time. A good story will have timeless elements to it, as timeless as humanity itself, as timeless as characters and the journey and challenges they face, as timeless as our past is, no matter how far back we may try to go. If religion is our greatest expression of our humanity as a social structure, then stories are our greatest expression of our humanity through our ability to communicate. If you long to be reminded of what it feels like to be human in this current overly digitalised and dehumanised world, then go find a cosy corner, a good book, and spend some time in another place and time with characters you would prefer to be with. So now that we have pulled out these universal sub-themes, these themes that give us human characters we can identify with, a world that we can relate to, and a journey and arc to follow towards a more humane outcome, or the consequences suffered when humanity is lost, we can now look to see what our stories use to define these various expressions of our humanity told through our many and varied stories. It's the human challenged with their own humanity, to not do what is easiest or in their own self-interest, but to rise to the moment and show a higher expression of our humanity, to resist the ring's power, forego eternal life given by the Holy Grail, refuse the invite to rule the galaxy together, and to err on our humaneness, to choose the path that pulls us from our basic pathological instincts and pushes us and the narrative towards a greater humanity than the one we currently have. And it's also our stories that show us the other side of the coin. In order to build a story up to these greatest expressions of our humanity, we also need our stories to remind us of all the bad in the world, how evil people can be, what can happen when people are tempted by the devil, when people pursue their own interests and not the interests of all. It's these components of a story that also give us a pause and a dark side of the moon to consider. Maybe it's a chance for us to reflect on some of our own poorer decisions and behaviours and be reminded that acting against our humanity will have its consequences. Or maybe for those more pathological people, just maybe our darkest stories enable them to also find something to align with, even if they are not one of our more humane stories. If you were wondering, why is a podcast about arseholes focusing on stories? Well, it's through our stories that we initially get introduced to poor behaviour and pathological decisions. It's in our stories that we first get to see variations of these arsehole people. That is, if they're not in our home or the inner circles of our social groups. From Peter Rabbit's perspective, Farmer Brown is an arsehole for not sharing his veggies and how cruel he is in protecting his patch. For most people who grow up in a supportive, safe home and community, the only way you get to understand pathological decisions or sociopathic behaviours will be through stories. Yes, stories are supposed to entertain, but it's our humane stories that persist through time. And that is usually because they communicate information about our humaneness and our ability to be inhumane and antisocial. But it is in our stories where we search for and find examples of our humaneness, our humanity. It's this underlining theme sitting under all the sub-themes that underpins all the traditional story structures that make up the backbone of how we best communicate our humanity, through our stories. Stories truly are our greatest expression of communicating our humanity, and so they should be. They have an awesome subject to explore: humans. They give us something more than everyday life, an extension to understanding more about our past, an insight into another version of this thing we all call life, and they can also take us far into the future, into a world we may never see. And as with all stories, they all must come eventually to an end. But as the old proverb says, when one door closes, another one opens. This ending may be someone else's start. Where a story ends in tragedy, another one may find a path to redemption. All stories interlink, at least on a human level. They all share a soft reflection of how we interpret ourselves and the world around us, to a degree. And this brings us to the last underlining theme of all stories. It is something more essential to all stories than the characters, the plot, the world the story unfolds in. It's more important than a start, a middle, and an end. So what is this last and important aspect to every story? Well, it's that all stories are fundamentally designed to be shared. A story is not a private journal entry. Stories are public property. They are there for everyone, for anyone to take and reshare, reinterpret and renew for a new audience. Stories are our greatest expression of our humanity, and that can only be expressed by sharing each story with others. To share the lessons and the knowledge contained inside each narrative. To share the emotions, the ecstasy, elation and wonderment. To share the grief, loss and trauma. That is essentially what stories are, us expressing our humanity to each other through stories. And so it is with humanity that we round out this episode. Where else could we end up, really? The story of our humanity, our past, our present, and our collective futures is truly the greatest story of all. And it's a story that actually is our very own never-ending story. Thanks again for taking the time to join in. A quick thanks to dreamtitan.net.au for providing this version of the Rainbow Serpent for us to read for you, and for the traditional didgeridoo rhythms of Lewis Burns. We hope you enjoyed this story about stories. Truly, the more you lift the lid on what stories are and how they have evolved over time, the more amazing the craft of story creation and story writing is. For example, how could you improve on bookending a story with a gun barrel between your teeth, you speak only in vowels. And you met me at a very strange time in my life. Pure genius. Too Many Arseholes is researched, written and produced by Nobody's Project. To put this series together, we have drawn on many sources, publications, books and podcasts. Throughout this series, we'll ask you to go and read or listen to an article, book or podcast to accompany our episodes. Check out our show notes for recommendations for upcoming episodes and also for our sources. It is important that we acknowledge and promote the people and the work they have published that has inspired this project. And finally, we always are keen to hear from you. Do you have an experience, idea or insight that you'd love to share with the project? If so, please send an email to contactus@toomanyarseholes.com. Visit our social media pages and please feel free to get in contact and have a better conversation with us. To support the project, you can go to our Patreon page where you can get more information on the project and support us. You can also join our Patreon group and get early and ad-free episodes, as well as many other benefits. You can also like, subscribe and review the podcast to help spread the conversation. And the best way to support us is to share the podcast with your family, friends and colleagues so you can have a better conversation with them. Until we catch up again, give a shit about our planet and just please, don't be an arsehole.
Turn around, look at what you see in her face, the mirror of your dream. Make believe I'm everywhere, give it in the light. Written on the pages is the answer to a never-ending story.